Let's go up then. Haven't heard you stand up. I did it a couple of times when I worked in this team, so it's all rough. Can you hear me now? Just get things set up, so just give me everyone set up.
All right, good evening. It is 6 o'clock and we'll call the meeting to order with roll call. Councilmember Tomerlin.
Present.
Councilmember Navarrete.
Here.
Councilmember Lant.
Here.
Councilmember Byrd.
Here.
Vice Mayor Alonso.
Here.
And I am present. Let the record be known that Mr. Councilmember Aguilar is excused. If everyone would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And this is a special meeting, work session of the town council, so no invocation tonight. We're going to proceed with our work session, and agenda A is discussion of the pay studies for the police and fire departments.
So I want to set a basis for this so we understand why we're going down this path. The resolution copper agreement, the emergency services agreement expires 6 months after the record of decision. So if the land exchange happens within 6 months, we have to negotiate an entirely new agreement with Resolution Copper for emergency services. The EIS says that they will pay any direct costs, so we have to be able to justify all of those direct costs to the penny in order to get the appropriate amount of money to do this expansion. One of the initial concerns of the police and fire departments and myself, frankly, is that our pay rates are not competitive. So expanding the number of employees we need to have in order to fill up these positions that we're contracted to provide may require us to adjust our pay scale to be more competitive. So the first tasking order I gave to the chiefs was to do a pay study of the agencies around us and see where we're sitting and see if we can get a grasp on what our next step should be, what a good comp would be, what an agency similar to us that we could use as a model to adopt a new pay structure. One of the big challenges we are going to face with this is that we do not have a scale. So scales are, they start low and they get high based on experience and time in. Generally, we don't pay that poorly if you just look at our average, and compare it to the entry level of other agencies, but we never go higher. So we never rise in the scale. So that damages retention, and that is going to be a challenge for us to figure out how we address a scale. There's also, if we raise these rates extraordinarily high, and we don't raise the rest of the town staff positions, the entire scale becomes untenable, and we will lose personnel in other departments. As an example, last year we agreed to give a raise to the police department. They did not fill a position and they used that money to give a raise. That raise is now cascaded through every town department. So we have to be aware that the little changes like this do not happen in a vacuum, and we can't just raise one department without looking at the scale for the whole town. So those are some of the core concerns I have. We're going to have to do a lot of work to develop something that could potentially have a scale attached to it. We're going to have to do a lot of work to compare some of these proposals in intimate detail. Because, for instance, you're seeing hourly rates. Are these agencies on a different tour of duty than we are? Fair Labor Standard Act says that we have exemptions for police and fire for their tours of duty. It takes, because firemen sleep on duty, their exemptions are much higher. So they do not get overtime until 112 hours in 2 weeks, or 220 hours, no, it's 106 and 212. And there are other ways to do that. We could not pay them for sleep time and only pay them when they get up. I mean, there's a lot of complexities, but generally that's the way it's done, is you pay 106, because that's what the federal law says we can do. Anything above that, they get paid overtime. Different fire departments have different shifts. They may be, we are 4896, which means 3 shifts. There are some departments that run 4 shifts, A, B, C, D shifts. There are some that have, you know, shorter overtime. There's some that only run on 80-hour overtime. They don't use the exemption. So all of these things have to be looked at in detail before we adopt one of these pay scales for our departments. This is just, again, the first step to see where we sit on that scale. And with that, I'll pass it over to the police chief first. And he can, I've got his presentation up on the screen, and you have the latest printout in front of you.
Good evening, council. Good evening, mayor. So what I did, I put together a pay study for our department, and I compared 8 other agencies, surrounding agencies. You know, some might be a little further, but still, it's a good comparison as far as the manpower, the community size, and the budget that they run. So there were 8 agencies that I compared our police budget, which was Florence, Payson, Globe, Parker, Wilcox, Quartzsite, Miami, and Hayden. Now, obviously some of these are much bigger and some of them are much smaller, so we wanted to get both sides. As you know, right now we have 8 positions, 8 officers that we are funded. That's not including myself. Right now, you know, we have 2 vacant positions, and we have 6 officers that are currently working. So we're still in the process of hiring, especially with the code enforcement officer and another patrol officer. So just take that into account as far as the staffing overview that's going to be on the pay study. I went based off population too. If you look at the first page, the summary, it breaks it down to the population of each town. The most comparing to our town would be Quartzsite at 2389. So if you look at Quartzsite, for example, at 2389, the population, they have a budget of 1.7 million at 2024 police, their budget in 2024, and 2.1 for FYI 2025. So they had an increase, you know, 400,000 that following year. Their department is about 12 officers. They carry about 12 officers. That includes a lieutenant and a police chief. So that's something to look at. You know, of course, their budget's a little higher than ours, but that's something to compare to, especially as we grow as a community. The next one that I think we're pretty dead on is Wilcox. If you look at Wilcox, we got a population of 3,200. You know, I know that we're up in the 2000s here, but the budget, if you look at the budget, they actually were at 1.8, and last year, and this year they dropped it to 1.3. They're running 11 officers right now. It's kind of an approximate, don't quote me too much on it, but that's about how many officers they're running right now. And so if you look at that's kind of the comparisons that we're looking at. I don't want to go down every one of them, but those are the 2 that are very comparable to our community and our department. We got some low ones. Obviously Hayden doesn't, they only have, I believe, is it 9 officers actually, but their budget is at 593,000. So which they took a big drop, from last year. What I wanted to also do is compare the current, salary for officers and sergeants, of each department. As you know, our departments get paid $25 an hour for an officer position, $29 for a sergeant position. It's not a bad pay, but I can tell you that if you compare it to agencies that I talked about as far as population and their budget, for example, Quartzsite. Quartzsite will starting pay for their officers $28.84. Their sergeant is $31.72. So it's about $3.84 higher than our officers, and a couple more dollars as far as the sergeant pay. Another comparison is Wilcox, again, $25.12, which is pretty much dead on what we are pretty much making, and $27.63 for sergeants, which is a little below what our sergeants make, which is $29. So that's pretty comparable, but they also are running, they're running, let's see, well, actually, they went from 1.8 again to $1.3 million on their police budget, so that's a comparison to go off of. If you look at any other agencies, you know, our partners here, you know, next to us is Globe. You know, they pay their officers at $29.28, and their sergeants at $32.97. You know, Globe obviously does have a much bigger budget than us. Their budget's at $6.5 million right now, and 5.5 in 2024. So if you look at, like I mentioned, you know, the ones that I can compare a lot of our pay study is to Quartzsite. You know, Parker's a much bigger department, but they pay pretty well for their officers. They have 12 officers, but their budget is much higher than a lot of other agencies their size, which is $2 million. But they're also, if you look at their, if they look at the officer pay, it's $32.75 for starting officer, which is pretty much on the higher end than a lot of these agencies here, as far as the budget and the population there. That's a pretty good pay as far as what we're looking at as far as these pay studies. The sergeant's $36. That's a much higher hourly pay than a lot of agencies, even almost what Payson is paying their officers, which is $38, but we're looking at, I believe there's 16,000 people that actually live in that community. I never realized how big Payson was, but their pay is a lot higher than a lot of these comparisons that I did. What Todd talked about a little bit is just about the progression of our STEP program. What I did is a STEP progression for our department. What we currently make right now is $25 for an officer and $29 for a sergeant. We would do an 3% annual STEP progression, which would, you know, year 2 bring them up to $25.75, $29.87 for sergeants, and then year 3, $26.52, and $30.77 for year 3, all the way up to year 7, which they'll top off at $29.85 as an officer and $34.63 as a sergeant. That's what it would be on our current pay scale that we have right now if we decided to implement a STEP program based on what we have right now. And that's pretty comparable to a lot of agencies on between 3 to 5% increases on their annual evaluations and you know, yearly increases in merits. So that's something that's pretty typical as far as departments. And then we go on to the chief salaries. You see that obviously Florence is a much bigger department which has 31 officers, and they're the highest paid in this pay study that I did. Our lowest was Miami, who currently carries 4 officers at $75,000, and then everybody in between. Again, we look at the two that I kind of zeroed in on. It was Courtside at $114,753 and Wilcox at $113,000. So those are the different comparisons as far as the chief salaries and some of the officer and sergeant salaries that I did a pay study on. Again, this is the agencies that are very similar to ours. It gives us an idea, you know, being small towns, some of them are obviously bigger than others, but this is a good idea of what is being paid out to officers out there and sergeants. A lot of these departments do have lieutenants. They don't carry a big chain of command like big agencies where they have captains and they have you know, corporals, or they'll have assistant chiefs and things like that. That is something that I would like to, you know, hopefully down the road implement it as a full-time lieutenant position. I think it's great to have that, especially at an agency as we continue to grow. Courtside, who was very similar to our pay study, they have a lieutenant, and I spoke to their chief, and they it's a very it's a good position that helps you know, with the organization of the department and helps with the span of control with their sergeants and officers. So that's kind of a breakdown. I know it's kind of a lot of information. Does anybody have any questions? No.
I have a few questions. So I'm looking at your studies and salary grades and the amount of officers for some of the examples you provided. And I'm looking at Courtside, I'm sorry, Wilcox, since they're pretty much similar in budget to us. They have 11, you said 11 officers?
Yeah, approximately 11 officers.
We have 8?
Yes, sir.
How are they budgeting for 11 and we have 8? Where's the offset there?
Well, that could be.
Salaries look identical.
Yeah, that could be equipment. That could be maybe civilian. That could be you know.
So I can answer some of that question. In the original ESA contract negotiations, we were pushing for a pay increase for our staff, and the ESA committee rejected that approach. Resolution Copper rejected that approach. They would not allow us to use any of the money for staffing. So all of the money gets spent for equipment and for, you know, tasers and body cams, which is great. We have beautiful equipment. Given a choice, we would spend less of that money on equipment and more of it on personnel. And that's where, when we go into this upcoming negotiation, we need to make a sea change on that. We need to be paying our staff. Our staff is our most important asset, not our trucks.
So when we go into this next agreement, what's the terms of that agreement as far as length? And if we go at that with, hey, we're gonna focus on direct costs for our staff, when that agreement expires and if we don't have the funding to fund that, what happens?
That is exactly my worry. And to answer the first question, it is life of mine and secured by it's actually in the EIS. So for at least the next 40 years, they need to pay us the money for that. What we are pushing for, and our current negotiation stance, is to put all that money in an endowment that we control and that we can draw on a yearly basis. And that continues to grow in perpetuity, so that in 40 years, it still will support the same staffing levels. And that takes that insecurity out of the equation. We all have been through mine closures, strikes, mine sales. We all know that can happen, and when there's new management coming in, if we have to renegotiate every time that happens over the next 20 decades, we're all gonna get old very fast. An endowment up front returns the control to the community. We don't have to have them micromanaging our expenses. Under the current ESA, every expense has to go to the ESA committee and be approved. And that gives, there are only 2 votes on a 6 or a 7 vote panel, but that still gives that contract an outsized amount of control on where we spend our money. And again, it has led to this shift where we have really nice equipment and we can't pay our staff as much as we would like.
One more thing to add too is, we do have reserves. We employ 8 reserves right now, and we do pay them. So it is rare for a department to pay the reserves. It's not common in many agencies. We're one of the few. The budget on that, I kind of have an idea of what it is, but it's closer to the $100,000 mark. So those are the type of things that Todd has, tasked me to look at also down the road as far as our budget that we're going to look at this coming year.
I would say the reason that the reserve programs are so valuable is because we pay a reserve a lesser rate than a full-timer, and if we use a full-timer to fill a slot that somebody up for overtime, they're going to be costing us $40 an hour, $50 an hour. If we use a reserve, he's costing us $20. That's why the reserve programs are so valuable, and why every dime spent on a reserve program pays dividends. So the police budget, the fire budget, yes, they have a reserve budget, but most of that money is paid out of the overtime, the sick time, and the vacation time that is budgeted for the full-timers, because they come in and they cover those shifts at a much lower rate. So overall, those programs are a huge savings, and the more we can expand them, the more reserves we have to fill those slots, the less overtime we have to pull from our full-timers, the more efficient our department is. That's true for police, it's true for fire.
Any more questions on the police?
Yes, I'm sorry, I have more questions. I don't think it's necessarily for police. Todd, you talked about we gave increases and now basically it impacted the other departments and we had to bring them up?
Yeah, like the fire, the department came to council this year and got a raise, and a good portion of that's because we gave the police department a raise and they were uncompetitive. So that is true across, it's a subtle effect, it's a psychological effect, but it does affect staffing. People come to my office and demand raises much more often than when they normally do, which is part of the job. But it's if we raise one part of the scale, we just have to be clear-eyed that it's unlikely to stay in just that one wing. The rest of the departments are going to have to rise at least a little bit to offset that.
But the EIS is only going to cover direct cost of police and fire, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, and
So
that's the
if
concern with this.
that's clear and we explain that, and that's how this is being funded.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say this in a way where it doesn't sound negative, so I'll just leave it at that.
I think in addition to that conversation, a lot of these agreements, especially for some of our senior council members, when you remember when we got started in 2016, all of these negotiations, everything was very kind of chaotic and we had to do a lot of trust building. And I know we're in negotiations right now for our next RED agreement, our next 3-year agreement. And I know whether it's the town or Rebuild, the chamber, Arboretum, everybody's identifying different things that it's great to have all the project money, but it's not great that we don't have any money to cover the administrativeness actions of this. And so that's been one of the conversations. And when we floated the endowment idea for these mitigation agreements, I have to say that, they were kind of like, wow, that's a great idea, because it's also an administration hurdle for them as well. And I think everybody who's been working on this, this very pivotal time in our history is also saying, like, we want these things to last. We don't want to leave something that, you know, a future town manager in 10 or 15 years has to say, you know, you know, can they go, how do they go in and renegotiate, and this would really protect the town long term. And I know we feel it in the admin department, because everybody, like, everything that happens in police and fire and public works or library, it all has to funnel back through admin too. So they're having to, you know, process HR and all of those things, and we do a lot with a very little tiny staff, and that's very appreciative, but it's also not sustainable long term. So I'm glad that the mantra's changed from those very early days when you were on the ESA, and it was like, oh no, you're not using this for staffing, to kind of now saying like, oh, wait a minute, we're at that point now that maybe that has to change a bit.
So maybe that's part of the negotiation, is adding the administrative costs to this.
It is in there is an admin staff position and direct cost for the admin staff position in the EIS and the original scoping, but we have asked for a 10 to 15% administrative fee on all of our contracts, plus paid administrative positions to cover this. So this is very early days in renegotiation. Any negotiation, you enter in with your wish list, and we will get some of it, we will not get other parts.
Sure.
But we are going after actual offsetting money. For instance, our audit cost twice as much this year as it did in previous years. Why? Because there's a ton of different agreements coming in as one check that has to be sorted out over 6 different funds. And so our staff does that as well as they can, and then an accountant has to come in and he has to fix it and make sure all the funds are properly balanced. And we pay him $105 an hour to do that, so that adds up very quickly. So we need offsetting costs for that as well, and we've made that ask. So again, we're in mid-cycle on some of these agreements. They aren't coming due for another year, so we're only in the early stages of making our ask right now.
One more question. Regarding the step-based process, Chief, so we're saying we're basically doing 7-year step progression, is that correct?
Yes, that's about the average of other departments. They usually top off about the 7th year. So, you know, if we have officers coming in with experience, we base that off our progression or our step.
So if an officer comes in with 3 years and they get paid in this 2652, the next year, is that performance-based evaluation to determine whether or not they're eligible for the full 3%?
Yeah, it's gonna be based on their evaluation on performance base, and that's usually what we do. You know, one thing that I noticed that in our department is that we haven't had an evaluation on our guys in
That's why I was asking.
7 years. You know, so we're not even doing that right now. I've implemented that because I think we should have it no matter what. Because even if you leave this department, you want to have something to show how your performance was. So that's something that we've implemented in our department internally. But yes, that's usually where your merit increases happen, is based on your performance.
And that's another thing, the town itself, from my evaluation of the department heads, we're a year overdue for that. We are overloaded in our admin department, so time for projects like that just hasn't been materializing. But we have to prioritize it, and we need more admin support.
No, I get it. I was just trying to understand how the step process works, and if we're just giving 3% for people who stay here every year, or they're being evaluated and it's performance-based, and if we do have a pool of 3%, if the mayor's killing it, I get 2% because I'm an underperformer, and she gets 4 because she's overperforming? Like,
Well, you know, I mean, 3 is the average. I mean, other agencies go up to actually 7%.
No, I understand, but
You
I'm
know.
looking at what you have here as 3%, so I'm just using that as
Yeah.
a baseline for what a pool would be if we were to go this route.
Generally, when I look at these scales, each year is 3% average, but it's got a range. So that year, you're either on the bottom end of that step or the top end of that step, and they have two numbers in all of those steps. So we will have to, again, we're not to design yet on an actual scale. We will have to do that work, and it's going to be very difficult. So mostly because our existing positions, we have to figure out where does each position sit on that scale. For instance, I've been the town manager 10 years. I'm probably at the max for my scale, so we could build that scale backwards. The police department, you know, if their average is similar to the other department, but the entry level is lower than they're currently making now for another agency, do we set our entry level at lower, but give them a step incentive to get higher? All of those questions are gonna have to be answered when we design the scale, and it's gonna be very difficult. We're gonna have to do a model. We're going to have to number it out, figure out all the expenses of what it's gonna cost, and then if it's too much, then we have to go back to the drawing board and start all over again. So this is gonna be, that's why we're starting so early, because this is gonna be a bear to do, to figure out. And we haven't had a scale for 20 years, and we're trying to implement one, and we can't just do it for one department. We're gonna have to do it for the entire town. We're gonna have to set grades for each position. We're gonna have to put scales on that. That's gonna be a lot of work, and and there's no extra money coming in from these contracts to pay other departments that are on that we're gonna have to add to that scale. So how do we fund that? So these are all wide open questions, and they're gonna be very difficult to answer, and it's gonna take at least 6 months of hard work to come up with solutions. But the first step is to at least see where we sit. And I feel like we're leaving the fire chief out, so.
Yeah, I'm good. You guys are doing, all the questions get answered already, so I'm good.
Yeah, I wanna be mindful of time, but if Chief Bettis wants to kind of give us his synopsis, I think it's very similar. But share with us your research, and I know Todd has the emergency scenario he wants to go over with us too.
Okay, yeah, Council and Mayor, we have a study did with Chief Gatto and Captain Barton did a study. We chose 9 different communities, and the closest we got to ours was Tri-City Fire Department. They do transport patients like we do. Globe doesn't. I know Kearney doesn't. Fire Department, they don't do theirs. No, those are volunteer departments. So we went down the pay scale for us up here, starting at the bottom, and Tri-City is next above us, and they are at 1751 for a beginner, and we're at 1646. This is a firefighter EMT, not a paramedic, and the next closest one would be Globe, and they're at $20 an hour to start. So we try to get departments that are pretty close to us. Some, of course, are bigger. We have a Superstition Fire in there, which is, they serve a big area, and they do their own transports on the ambulance side. I know Coolidge don't do their own transports. They got AMR. So it's kind of hard to really get somebody close to our area, what we deal with. And we came with that, the Tri-City Fire was probably our closest department we can compare some wages to. And we also have, we just have chief, assistant chief, captains, and that's it. Some other departments have other different, like lieutenants. Maybe they have battalion chiefs. Ours is very minimal. And as for our full-timers, we got 7 full-timers and 5 reserves, which includes me. And we got 1 reserve who lives out of town and 4 of us in town. So our staffing is very low right now. And so as we did these scales, we kind of want to, we looked at the steps that Tri-City does. And I think through the 10 years, each year they go up. And right now our fire department doesn't have that. In fact, chief right here says, we haven't had evaluations in 5 or 10 years. The only time we got raises when the minimum wage went up, everybody went up. There was nothing to go for. Well, we're just going to get 20 more cents, you know. So we want to make some type of scale that they want to be better at their job to get to the next level. So you want to have some type of scale. Will have to be discussed on how we can get from firefighter EMT to the next level, captain, and so on. But these are pretty the closer we can get, we called a lot of people, got a lot of information from everybody, and, we chose 9 different communities. And that's what we started with. And with the pay scales going like this, it helps bring people wanting to work here. It brings, you know, people who might want to stay. They see some type of, you know, they can get somewhere. And of course, like any other department, they use us to start somewhere and they head off to bigger departments. But you know what? We have a good group of guys right now who've done a real good job. And we're trying just to get closer to be more attractive to other people who want to do what we do. And people know this is a small community. They know it's not Phoenix, so they know that coming in this place. But at least it shows that, you know, we're up within the smaller communities and there's something they can go for as they stay on the department, however long they want to stay. I don't know if you want to discuss the pay scales or what, you got any questions?
Any questions for Chief Bettis from the council?
I just have a comment. Chief, when you build out the pay scale a little bit more, advanced EMT and critical care paramedic, they just, the state has started recognizing and they have approved something like 15 programs for advanced EMT, and the critical care transport is spinning up at a couple separate college campuses right now, so that might be something you want to take into consideration. We're building out the pay scale a little bit.
So I heard about that happening for, especially like rural areas, paramedics are hard to find sometimes. So if you get an advanced EMT, it'll help the community greatly. So yes, I can take that into consideration. Appreciate it.
Sir.
I think my questions will probably be similar to everything I just asked Police Chief. I guess if we're gonna go this route and we're gonna look at them funding the direct costs, I think it's important we look at how we're gonna implement this in these steps. So that way, if we do go after an endowment, then all this stuff is covered. And we're not trying to figure out where we get funding to fund our increases for all of our staff, basically.
I would agree, and one of the areas that, and when you do these look at the pay studies and you compare, a lot of our, taking the town manager and the police chief and out of it, most of the other department heads are well below the standards for everyone, all the other agencies. So our public works director, very low paid, our clerk. So we're starting at a deficit. So it's very difficult to justify just fixing it all at once. So this might be a scaled-in plan. This might be dependent on town revenues. It might not all be resolution copper. So we just have to be clear-eyed on making it something we can sustain, and that's going to be the big challenge.
I agree.
Well, and that's why our future economic growth, you know, both with and, you know, with a diversified economy is so important in making the decisions we need to make about selling our land exchange parcels, what businesses we put in there, how are they going to increase revenues for the town so we don't get in the, you know, precarious pinches that we often sometimes find ourselves in. Do we have anything else to discuss on the pay studies for the police and fire at this time? Okay. I appreciate all the work that everybody's doing. We know this is extra work and it's a lot of housekeeping things that we're all kind of going through some growing pains. So thank you, chiefs, and to your staff for working through that, and Todd as well. Agenda item B, discussion of Town of Superior's contingency plans. And for those of us in the public, we're talking about some pretty unique circumstances right now. As you know, the economy's been a little rough. That's affecting the town's budget right now. We have the government shutdown that we just got out of. That's meant the town's held on to about $80,000 in money that we've been waiting for. And because of all the flat taxes hit, which Governor Ducey's administration enacted, so that's flattened out the taxes, and you might not be paying so much in taxes, but that's affected the monies coming to cities and towns, and Santan Valley Incorporated, which means we're gonna lose about $150,000 roughly in revenues. So we're having to make some contingency plans to make sure that everybody stays on, paid and we don't have to lay people off. So interesting presentation on decisions that council will have to make so we can move swiftly and not find ourselves getting into a situation we got into several years ago. So Todd?
So to be clear, the town's financial house is in order. We're not, we're making all our bills, there's money in the bank, we're not robbing from Peter to pay Paul, we're still fine. The problem we've had over the last 4 years is that, and it's mostly related to the wastewater treatment plant and the debt service related to that, but every year our cushion, and so there's a cycle in our revenue streams. We get a lot of our money in the winter and the spring when everybody's in town spending their money at our tourism, and that drops off precipitously in the summer. It's also when nobody's paying the property tax. Property tax has already been paid. All the contracts are with resolution are paid out and gone. It's a revenue desert, and it dips to its lowest point of the year. About 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, it was $600,000 when it dipped to its lowest point. Then it was $500,000. Last year it was about $400,000. This year it was $300,000, and our lowest point we got to $240,000. That's not all the money in the bank. That's the unassigned money that we can spend on operations. That is lower than the monthly nut. So our monthly nut's $300,000 roughly if we tighten our belts. So that's not enough cushion for us to be comfortable that we can cash flow projects and cash flow our operations. So we need to build our cushions back up. That's going to be the discussion for next fiscal year. We've already made some moves. For instance, the engineer position in town resigned, and we are not filling that. We're using contractors instead. That will save about $100,000. The wastewater treatment plant should be completed and the loan bought out in the next 2 months. That should stop that decrease. But we have new impacts coming on, which is Santan, and the flat tax impacts and everything else. So for next budget year, we want to start looking at what are the steps we take if we get in a low revenue position to stabilize the cash flow so that our inputs are meeting outputs long enough for us to get through the low cycle to get to back up to revenues coming back up. And yes, we need to be looking at building our cushions up, but with everything happening in the economy, everything happening with Santan, it's hard to predict what next year is going to look like until we start actually getting some of the projections for next budget year. With that in mind, this list is just some basic steps I can take with council pre-approval to stabilize the cash flow. It also sets a limit where we're in real trouble and I have to come back to the council and I have to ask them for real cuts for the hard choices. I would, as this says, if any of these are implemented, I would notify the council immediately within 24 hours or 48 hours, and I think it's 24 hours. And we would make sure that we're trying to go for low-hanging fruit, things that we can avoid immediately paying out on. We can delay until the revenue desert goes past. And we want to make sure that if this is ever activated, we understand that the next budget year we have to make adjustments to get our cushion back. So this year, again, our low was 240. We're at about $289,000 in the bank right now, but there's a $200,000 check going in right now. So we'll be back around $500,000 by tomorrow. So we're coming out of the revenue desert. Our tax revenues are starting to come. You see the downtown people down there eating, they're spending money. That money's coming in as sales tax. We're starting to see the revenue cycle come back up. So we're out of it for this year most likely, now that the shutdown's passed. The shutdown, we'll see that extra $80,000 or $100,000 come into the bank. We'll be over $600,000. We'll see all of our contract checks come in the next 2 months. We'll be over $1.5 million fairly quickly. But you can see that's a pretty wild swing from one part of the year to the other. And we need to have enough cushion so when we hit the bottom end of that swing, we're not dragging our butts in the dirt. So that's what this is designed to do, is to take interim steps. This is just a discussion point. It's on for approval tonight, but if the council wants to give me more feedback this is probably not going to be implemented until next fiscal year, if at all. Hopefully it won't be implemented at all. We're gonna fix it in this budget year so that we don't never get to this point. But, we would like to have an emergency protocol in place so that we can take immediate steps if something comes up. And I want the council to understand that if we reach the point where I have to look at making layoffs or something like that, I would come back to the council. You guys would make those choices. The purse strings for the town are controlled by the council, so I'm asking for pre-authorization to do certain limited things.
So we're in work session right now, so council, this is a good time to ask any questions or ask for any clarifications from Todd on this. Just putting this in perspective, I appreciate that Todd did this work and put it in a plan that we can all understand, that I think our staff can understand, and this is the worst case scenario. I think it's important to be prepared. I know in sharing a little bit of information from our communities that have been affected really bad by the floods, how quickly they burned through their cushion, making sure that they had all that they needed and paying overtime and all of those types of things. So I think it's very prudent of us to start preparing, because you just don't know. We just saw what happened because of the government shutdown, how that really had us all a little bit more skittish. Had it gone on much longer, it would have really had a bigger effect on our residents for sure.
On phase 2, across the board cuts for each department, like what method would you use to determine what we
Each department, our department meetings, we tell staff that we have a revenue shortfall, and that they need to look for all non-discretionary spending, and to prepare, each department has to prepare a spectrum of cuts. These aren't permanent cuts, they're short term. They could just be delays of projects, or scheduling work at a different time. But nobody can tell a department head better than themselves and their own staff where there's flex and where they can get by. And so each department head would have to say, okay, here's where I can save a little money, I can cancel this training, or I can, here's where I can get us through this shortfall. And again, these are all sort of voluntary steps to avoid getting to the worst case steps.
So I know I sent you a ton of questions towards the end of the day today regarding this, but I did go look at the budget, and do we ever get into detail with the department heads where we look at spend to budget versus forecast, to where we look at that stuff, and it's not just, hey, we're over, we're under budget, but how are they do they understand their forecast, and do they understand their budget and how they're tracking to it? Because that would eliminate a lot of what you just explained.
So I want to give, number one, the department heads a lot of credit. All of them are under budget. Everybody's doing real well with their budget. It isn't a budget problem, it's a revenue problem. So every year we sit down with each department head. We pull up their budget on a spreadsheet, we go through it line by line, we look for areas where they're high, where they're low, we try to figure out why and what adjustments need to be made, and then we package that together into the budget that the council sees. So that 27 sheet spreadsheet that you see, each department head has had that spreadsheet for at least a month or two before we have those meetings, and then we sit down and we go through them in detail. And the department heads all know online their entire budget is up with all the revenues and expenses. I track that on a monthly basis. From the current situation, everybody is on track. There are very few exceptions, and most of them there's a reason. Like, for instance, the pool is always over budget this time of year because they are only open for 3 months, right? So, but there are, for the police, fire, and the big departments, public works, they're all on budget. So again, credit where credit's due. They're doing a really good job of that. The problem isn't that. The problem is not enough money coming in at this particular juncture to meet the monthly nut. And so we're digging in.
I guess we're looking at it that way. you know, and it is a revenue issue. You guys understanding the budget and spending the forecast is gonna allow them to identify where those cut points could be.
Right. And we're gonna have to do that this year. We've already been talking about, the chiefs are already looking at areas where we're going to have to make reductions. The Santan impact is $120,000. We're gonna have to find that money somewhere. So, each agency, again, we're gonna go through each budget, we're gonna find areas that were, where it's nice to have the money, but we maybe don't need it to spend it this year, or, we can change some program and decrease the spending. But all of the, and there's also some issues, for instance, with revenues. We are not collecting, because we've given our officers a lot of raises, we are not collecting the money from the school to pay for the SRO. That program was supposed to be self-funding. It was gonna be, we spend $70,000 a year on that officer, or they get $70,000 a year for that officer, but we're paying out $95,000 a year for that officer. So we're losing $25,000 on that. But when that grant comes back around again, if we address that when they go to re-up the grant and we get the full $95,000 plus a 3% yearly COLA, then that stops bleeding money. Part of the issue we have right now, one of the things I haven't talked about, is the ambulance service. People aren't calling the ambulance, which is great. It's wonderful for our town. Everybody's healthy. But there's no transports. There's no revenues coming in for the ambulance. I think it's down $100,000 so far this year. So all of these little revenue hits always happen from year to year on an unpredictable cycle. I mean, who's going to predict how many people call the ambulance per year? But we have to have sufficient cushion in our budgets and in our revenues to make sure we get through those low periods. And that's where we're a little behind the eight ball, and why we're going to have to, this budget year, we're going to have to look at expenses and cut some expenses. We're also going to look at revenue generation everywhere we can. So.
Okay. That's all my question.
Well, I think it's important to note, we have a lot of residents in the room today. When you shop online, when you buy stuff from Amazon or Walmart shipped to your house, that actually helps in a shop local dynamic. It means that you're paying some of those fees and taxes that you're paying actually does come back to Superior. And then of course shopping locally in our local businesses, that helps shore up the budget. So when you're going out to eat and you're thinking about that, you are supporting the local economy in a much bigger way. And that's really important, especially as we have these other cuts. It's gonna be up to us as our own shopping and buying patterns to help support our local economy in a big way. So just every little bit counts, because when City of Phoenix talks about what they're losing, it doesn't feel as big because of Santan, but for us, $120,000 is huge. And 2 years ago, we gave up about $30,000 in revenue because to allow Maricopa County to vote on their road tax. So there's a lot of things that happen outside of Superior that affect us in bigger ways that we end up having to kind of, tolerate. And, for us, that's a lot of money. For City of Phoenix, it's a rounding error. And that's the way our state government is funded. So just some, little government 101 there. Anybody else have any other questions for Todd on this? I know it's an action item, so we can come back to any discussion. Hearing none, do we have a motion to adjourn so council can have a little break before the 7 o'clock meeting?
So moved.
Okay, there's a motion by Councilmember Tomlin, second by Councilmember Burr.
Yes.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries, and we've adjourned the work session at 6:53. Thank you, everyone.